Jessica Carter, a 29-year-old accountant, had just finished her late shift at the office. She drove to the nearby fry food supermarket. Just another stop on her way home. Just another regular task after a long day. But that night, everything would change. One moment she's walking out of the store, car keys in hand, a grocery bag in tow, the mundane act of shopping, the last normal part of her night, and then she disappears, gone. No signs of struggle, no immediate clues, just an eerie silence that swallowed up the sound of her footsteps. For 20 years, Jessica's fate remained unknown, a haunting mystery lingering over the city of Tempe, and her family, desperate, left with nothing but unanswered questions. Her disappearance would leave behind a trail of confusion and speculation. But no one knew, no one could have known, that the answer would lie in the smallest, most unexpected of details. A detail missed for years, until the right moment. The moment that would change everything. Let's take you back to that summer evening in the heart of Tempe, Arizona, where everything was about to shift. Jessica Carter was last seen walking toward her car, the parking lot illuminated by the sodium glow of street lamps. Her denim jacket reflected the light, her white sneakers tapping softly on the pavement. For a moment, she blends into the calm, the soft hum of the desert night. Nothing seemed out of place. The camera footage from that night captures her crossing the lot, her car keys lightly swinging in her hand. She approaches her car. She's just another person, going about her routine. But then, something happens. The camera angle shifts. The briefest of moments, a shadow crossing her path. A security guard, a figure in the distance, catches sight of Jessica. He watches her cross the lot, and then she's gone. Behind a row of tightly packed cars lost to the camera's view. What happened next, what no one saw, is where the mystery begins. Before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to know just how far this story's reaching. As the camera cuts away, we're left with only the sound of the desert night. No screams, no struggle, just a quiet parking lot. No one saw her leave. No one heard her car start. No one even noticed that Jessica Carter, who had just been walking toward her car, was now gone. Her car, found the next day, was locked. The keys still in the ignition, the grocery bag untouched on the passenger seat, her wallet and cell phone still sitting there, as if waiting for her return. But no sign of Jessica, not a trace, no footsteps, no final messages. And the question, what happened after she disappeared, began to haunt the city. Where did she go? Why didn't anyone hear her car return? The clock is ticking. The investigation starts, but the trail is cold. Every second that passes without an answer feels like an eternity. Was Jessica abducted? Did she run away? Or was there something far darker at play? This mystery wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as the sun set over Tempe, the answers, hidden in plain sight, remained just out of reach. The phone rings. It's been days. No news, no leads. Jessica's mother, Linda Carter, stares at the receiver, feeling her hand tremble as she picks it up. It's been hours since she last spoke to the authorities, but no one has called back. There's still no new information. Still nothing that explains where her daughter could be. Jessica had always been a creature of habit. She called home every evening, no matter how late it was. A quick check-in, a simple "I'm home" to her mom. But tonight, there was nothing. The silence feels louder than any noise she's ever heard. Linda sits at the kitchen table, the phone still in her hand, staring at the wall waiting. But there's no sound from Jessica. It's been almost a full day. And Jessica's apartment is still locked, untouched, the way it was when she left for the store. The groceries are still in the car, the phone on the passenger seat, her wallet next to it. Nothing's been taken. No sign of a struggle. Not a single clue to tell anyone where she's gone. The first few hours, Linda tried to remain calm. She'll turn up. She just had a bad night, she told herself. But as the hours passed, that hope began to wither. With every passing hour, it became more and more clear that something wasn't right. The police were doing their best, but it wasn't long before they ran into the same dead ends. No witnesses, no cameras, no leads. The case quickly became one of those frustrating mysteries, the kind of story that no one knows how to solve. Jessica had simply vanished, and no one knew why. As the days turned into weeks, Jessica's family grew frantic. Linda, overwhelmed with the sinking weight of fear, reached out to everyone she could think of. Jessica's friends, her coworkers, even the neighbors, anyone who might have seen something, anything that could lead them to her. But each conversation was met with silence. There were no new developments, only memories of a woman who was never late, a woman who always let her mom know she was safe. "She's reliable," her coworker said. "She wouldn't just vanish." Linda holds on to these words as if they're a lifeline, clinging to the idea that Jessica would never just leave. She couldn't. But each time she calls, each time she asks for updates, the emptiness gets harder to ignore. The police send search teams into the neighborhoods. Friends and strangers alike join in. Flyers are passed out. Social media posts are shared. But as the days slip into weeks, the cold desert air of Arizona seems to swallow everything. It's as if the earth itself has taken her. At the local diner, a waitress recalls Jessica coming in the night before. "She seemed fine," she says. "Nothing was off." The whole town is searching, but the truth begins to settle like dust over the investigation. No one has anything new to offer. No one knows anything more than the last known sighting of her walking out of the store. No one knows where she went or why. And the longer the search continues, the harder it is to ignore the grim reality sinking in. Every night, Linda waits for that phone call that will never come. Her hands are clasped tightly around the phone. She checks the caller ID over and over, expecting a number she recognizes, a voice she's longed to hear. But each time it's someone else, someone who offers a little more hope, a little more assurance, but never the answers she needs. Her mind is clouded with questions. What could have happened to her? Did she leave on her own? Was someone with her? Was it an accident? The silence is unbearable. Linda's mind races. She starts to question everything. She wonders if she could have done more. If she should have pushed Jessica harder to stay at home, or to change her routine, or to take better care of herself. But that's not how Jessica was. She was always independent, always in control. The silence is growing heavier with every passing hour. Every time Linda leaves her apartment, she wonders, did she miss something? Was there a detail she overlooked? Was someone watching her? Had Jessica been in danger all along, without anyone realizing it? As the investigation stalls, the case starts to slip from the public eye. The police don't have anything new. They're moving on to other cases. News outlets are starting to drop the story. The fresh headlines that once screamed Jessica's name are replaced with stories of other tragedies. People's attention span is short, and soon they forget the disappearance that shook Tempe. But for Linda, there is no forgetting. There is no moving on. The apartment is still empty. Jessica's things are untouched. The grocery bag is still in the car, growing warm under the sun. Every moment is a painful reminder that Jessica is out there somewhere, and no one can tell her why. As the weeks stretch on, the investigation stalls. The police are still looking, but each new day feels like it drifts further from any answers. The search grows quieter, and as that silence deepens, a new question begins to rise. What if Jessica wasn't the victim of some random act? What if she was never meant to be found? What if the person responsible is still out there, hiding in plain sight? The town of Tempe might be moving on, but Linda and her family, their grief only growing, are left clinging to the hope that somehow, somewhere, there is still someone who knows what happened. No answers, no suspects, just endless searching, and a family that has to live with the uncertainty. Could there be something they've missed? Something hidden right in front of them, waiting to be uncovered? Or will the silence continue, slowly choking off the hope of finding Jessica alive? The clock is ticking. Time is running out. What happened to Jessica Carter, and who was involved in her disappearance? The case grows cold, But a new lead is waiting to be uncovered, one that will bring this investigation back to life. The mystery isn't over. Not yet. Before we continue with the rest of this gripping case, I want to take a moment to thank all of you, my amazing subscribers, who've been supporting this channel to keep growing. It means the world to me that you're here for every new story, every shocking twist. And if you're as invested in Jessica's story as I am, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel to stay updated. We've still got a long way to go, and I don't want you to miss a single moment. Now share this video with someone who needs to hear this cold case unfold and let them know that justice may take time, but it does come. Now let's dive deeper into the mystery and see what happens next. 2 decades have passed since Jessica Carter vanished. In the years that followed, her name faded from headlines, slowly slipping into the long list of unsolved mysteries that haunt small towns across the country. The Tempe Police Department had all but moved on. The case was categorized as inactive, an unfortunate reality in the world of cold cases. Jessica was just another name, just another face that had disappeared without a trace. Her mother, Linda, still couldn't let go of the belief that someone, somewhere, knew what had happened to her daughter. She still prayed each night, hoping for some kind of miracle. Every year on the anniversary of Jessica's disappearance, Linda and the family would gather at the same spot, at the same park near the grocery store where Jessica was last seen, and hold a candlelight vigil. The flames flickered in the Arizona wind, casting long shadows as people quietly gathered, hoping for the same thing they'd been hoping for all these years: an answer. But as the years wore on, those flames burned a little dimmer, and the reality of the situation started to weigh more heavily on everyone's hearts. The pain of not knowing, of not understanding, had grown sharper over time. And while the vigils continued, the family's hope started to fade. They had no answers, no suspects, and no clear idea of where to even look anymore. Then in 2020, something unexpected happened. Something that would breathe new life into the case and change everything. An anonymous tip came in. The voice on the other end was shaky but clear. The caller spoke of Jessica's car, an old silver Toyota Corolla, abandoned near a highway over 2 decades ago. The caller had information about the car's location, something that hadn't been fully explored before. The tip led the detectives back to the same stretch of highway where Jessica's car had been found. The car had been locked and left untouched, with groceries in the back seat and the keys still in the ignition. The same facts that had been reviewed 100 times already. But this time, the tip brought with it a new level of urgency. Detective Claire Reynolds, the lead investigator who had inherited the cold case file, made the decision to re-examine the car once again. It wasn't much, a car abandoned in the middle of nowhere, but it was the only physical evidence that connected Jessica to anything. It was the one piece that still held the potential for an answer. And when they searched the car this time, they found something that had been missed before: a hair sample. It was small, unremarkable at first glance, but upon closer examination, it turned out to be crucial. The hair wasn't Jessica's. The discovery of this hair opened up a whole new world of possibilities. The DNA extracted from the hair sample was sent to a forensics lab, and after a series of tests, the results came back. The hair didn't match Jessica's, but it did match someone else, a name that had never come up in the investigation before: James Avery, a local mechanic. James Avery lived just miles from where Jessica's car had been abandoned. He was well known in the community, quiet, friendly, reliable. Everyone in the neighborhood trusted him. He worked at a local auto repair shop, fixing cars and doing minor repairs for people in the area. He seemed like a simple man with a simple life. No criminal history, no red flags. But the DNA didn't lie. It was his hair that had been found in Jessica's car. And now that small, seemingly insignificant detail had turned the case on its head. Detective Reynolds knew the discovery was just the beginning. There was still so much more to uncover. Who was James Avery? How could he be connected to Jessica's disappearance? Was he simply an innocent bystander? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Avery had been living in the same area when Jessica disappeared. He had access to the area where her car was found. But what did this mean? Was he just a man who had happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was this a clue that pointed to something far more sinister? Reynolds started digging into Avery's background. She spoke with people who had known him, tried to get a sense of who he was, what his relationships had been like, and as she uncovered more about his life, a troubling picture began to form. James Avery had a history of troubling behavior. He'd been accused of harassment and stalking by a few women in the neighborhood, though nothing had ever come of the complaints. The reports had been filed but had not led to any significant actions. In fact, it seemed like they had been brushed aside. It was the kind of thing that no one wanted to talk about, nothing that had ever really seemed important until now. But looking back, Detective Reynolds couldn't ignore the connections. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Jessica, too, had been uneasy before she disappeared. In the months leading up to her vanishing, she'd confided in friends about someone following her. Someone who made her feel uncomfortable. Could it have been Avery? A picture of Avery began to form, but there were still many questions left unanswered. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but they were starting to connect. Could James Avery be the person responsible for Jessica's disappearance? The DNA evidence linked him to the scene, but it wasn't enough to prove anything just yet. What if this was all just a coincidence? What if the DNA was planted? Could Avery be innocent? The investigation had reached a point of no return. Detective Reynolds had only one choice now. She had to dig deeper. She had to find out who Avery really was. She needed to know how deeply he was involved, and whether or not he was hiding something far worse than anyone could have ever imagined. And she had to act fast, because every day that passed made it harder to piece together what had happened all those years ago. But one thing was certain: the small, seemingly insignificant detail, the hair in Jessica's car, was about to unravel everything. The truth was out there, but it was buried in the most unexpected place. And now the investigation was about to shift into high gear. As the walls close in around Avery, Detective Reynolds knows this case isn't over. It's only just beginning. But the biggest question remains: how far will she go to uncover the truth? And who else is hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the right moment to be revealed? Can you believe the case has gone cold for 20 years? How do you feel knowing that Jessica's case was just one of many left unsolved? Do you think there could have been a breakthrough earlier? Let me know your thoughts below. And tell me, where are you watching from? I love hearing from people all over. Detective Claire Reynolds had begun to dig deeper into James Avery's life, hoping to uncover any detail that could explain how he was connected to Jessica Carter's disappearance. But with every passing day, Avery's past became increasingly more unsettling. The more Reynolds unearthed, the more the image of the quiet mechanic began to shift, from an ordinary friendly man in the community to something far more sinister. Avery had been a fixture in Tempe for years, well-known, well-liked, but not much else. He ran his own auto repair shop, always ready with a smile for his neighbors, always willing to lend a hand when needed. At first, there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary about him, but as Reynolds pressed on, she started to uncover a series of disturbing reports that painted a much darker picture. Over the years, there had been multiple complaints of harassment and stalking involving Avery, all from women who lived in the same area. At first, the complaints had seemed minor: unwanted attention, uncomfortable encounters, things that could easily be dismissed as misunderstandings. But as Reynolds examined the details of the cases, she realized they followed a pattern that was beginning to point toward Avery as someone who could have been more than just a neighborly mechanic. One woman had reported that Avery had followed her home late one night after she dropped her car off for repairs. Another woman claimed that he had lingered outside her apartment, watching her from his truck for hours on end. And yet another reported feeling stalked after Avery had shown up uninvited at several places she frequented. Each of these reports had been filed with the local police, but none of them had ever resulted in serious action. No charges had been pressed, and in most cases, the women had been too frightened or embarrassed to follow through with their complaints. Reynolds couldn't ignore the growing feeling in the pit of her stomach. There was a very real possibility that Avery had been stalking Jessica before her disappearance. The unsettling coincidences started to align, piece by piece. Jessica had told friends in the weeks leading up to her disappearance that she had been feeling watched, that she had noticed a strange car following her. She had even mentioned feeling nervous about being followed after work. It all pointed to one thing. Jessica had been aware of someone tracking her. But who was that person? Was it Avery? The investigation now had a new angle, one that could finally provide the answers that the Carter family had been waiting for. As Reynolds dug further, she uncovered a more chilling link to Jessica's case: Avery's truck. It was a vehicle that had been seen near Jessica's abandoned car the night she vanished. The descriptions of the truck from various witnesses matched: an older dark-colored Ford, possibly a F-150, with distinctive rust spots and worn tires. It had been spotted near the area where Jessica's car had been abandoned, and while it had seemed like just another coincidence at first, the pieces began to fit together in a way that could no longer be ignored. Avery had also been seen in the area that night. While he wasn't directly involved in the investigation at the time, his truck had been noticed by several people who had been out that evening. And when the timeline was reviewed, the truck's movements lined up perfectly with the time Jessica's car had been abandoned. This was no longer just about a missing woman. This was about a man who was now deeply entwined in the mystery of her disappearance. Could Avery have been stalking Jessica? Could he have been the one who had followed her from the grocery store? What happened between the moment Jessica left the store and the moment her car was found? It wasn't just about circumstantial evidence anymore. Avery's truck had been at the scene. His movements matched with Jessica's timeline, and his history of troubling behavior was impossible to overlook. It all pointed to one thing: Avery was a man with a dark side, a side he had been hiding for years. As Reynolds continued to connect the dots, the investigation took a darker turn. She found that Avery had known Jessica through mutual acquaintances. They had crossed paths on several occasions, and Jessica had even spoken to people about him before she disappeared. Avery wasn't just a stranger to Jessica. He was someone who had been in her orbit, someone she might have trusted at one point. This revelation sent a chill through Reynolds. It wasn't just about a random stranger who had followed Jessica that night. It was about a man who knew her, a man who had been around her, possibly even in her life, and who could have used that familiarity to his advantage. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Jessica had mentioned to friends that she had felt uneasy about a man she had seen around the neighborhood. It seemed like a passing comment at the time, something that could be easily dismissed as paranoia or overactive imagination. But now, with all the evidence mounting against Avery, that comment took on a much darker meaning. Jessica had been trying to tell someone. She had been trying to warn them that something wasn't right. But by the time anyone had noticed, it was already too late. The question that remained was chilling. Had Avery been stalking Jessica for months? Had he been watching her, learning her routine, waiting for the right moment to strike? And if so, why? What was his motive? The more Reynolds uncovered, the more the pieces began to fit together. But with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher. Could Avery have been hiding in plain sight all these years, deceiving everyone around him? How long had he been getting away with this kind of behavior? And how many other women had he stalked or hurt before? It wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about a man who had been living a double life, one that no one had suspected. And now, with the DNA evidence linking Avery to the scene, the investigation was far from over. What else would they find in Avery's past? What other secrets was he hiding? The walls were closing in around him, but the biggest question still lingered. What had happened to Jessica that night? The pieces were there, but the full picture still hadn't been revealed. And as Detective Reynolds continued her investigation, one thing became clear. The truth was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. What was hiding beneath the surface of Avery's life was far darker than anyone had suspected, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. What was Avery hiding? How many more secrets had he buried? And would Jessica ever get the justice she deserved? The answers to these questions lay just beneath the surface, and they were waiting to be uncovered. After years of carefully blending into the fabric of his community, James Avery's life came crashing down in an instant. The man who had been known as a friendly, helpful mechanic in Tempe, someone who had earned the trust of everyone around him, was suddenly facing a cold case that had haunted his city for 2 decades. And when the arrest came, it came like a thunderclap in a quiet town, sending shock waves that reverberated through every corner of the community. It all happened in the early hours of the morning. Detective Claire Reynolds and her team had been working tirelessly, gathering the final pieces of evidence they needed. They had Avery's DNA, the hair found in Jessica's car, the suspicious presence of his truck in the area the night she disappeared, and the troubling history of harassment that stretched back years. Forensics had finally provided a concrete link, an undeniable connection between Avery and the crime scene. But even with all of this evidence, no one could have predicted the way the arrest would shake the community to its core. The police moved quickly. Early that morning, a team of officers surrounded Avery's house. It was a small, unassuming bungalow in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Tempe. To the neighbors, it was just another house, with the same well-kept yard and a porch light that came on every night without fail. Avery had always been known for being friendly, greeting passers-by with a wave, helping neighbors with their cars, and chatting about the weather. No one suspected the man they spoke to every morning could be hiding such a dark secret. But that morning, everything changed. The SWAT team arrived first, silently setting up in the street, their vehicles and gear blending into the background of the suburban life. They had their orders: arrest James Avery, the man who had slipped under the radar for so many years, and charge him in the murder of Jessica Carter. The neighbors who woke up that morning had no idea what was unfolding in their peaceful streets. It wasn't until the loudspeaker crackled through the silence, "James Avery, this is the police. You are under arrest," that the truth started to sink in. Avery came outside, still in his pajamas, stunned by the sight of officers with guns drawn, moving quickly toward him. He didn't struggle, didn't try to run. His expression remained calm, almost detached, as they cuffed him and led him away. His neighbors, watching from their windows, stood frozen. How could this be happening? The man they had known for years as a friendly, ordinary mechanic was now being arrested for a crime that had baffled them all, one that had haunted their town for 2 decades. The news spread like wildfire. The arrest of James Avery was the talk of the town, with everyone scrambling to piece together what they had just learned. Neighbors who had lived next door to him for years couldn't reconcile the man they knew with the man who was now being charged with the murder of Jessica Carter. Avery had always been the model neighbor, the man who could fix a car, lend a tool, and offer a sympathetic ear. He was reliable, unassuming, and, most of all, trustworthy. He had always seemed so harmless, so ordinary. No one had ever suspected that behind his quiet demeanor lay something far darker. And now the revelation that Avery was linked to the disappearance of Jessica Carter left the community reeling. The questions flooded in almost immediately. How could this have happened? How long had Avery been hiding in plain sight? What was it that had driven him to commit such a horrific crime? And perhaps most troubling of all, what else could he have been hiding? Reynolds, though relieved to finally make the arrest, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. The arrest raised more questions than answers, and the community's shock only deepened the mystery. Avery had kept his secret for so long, living a life that seemed so normal, so unremarkable. The idea that someone could harbor such darkness and blend so seamlessly into a community was terrifying. And now the question on everyone's mind was, how many more secrets did Avery have hidden beneath the surface? The arrest had barely made the evening news, but already speculation was running rampant. Everyone in Tempe who had ever interacted with Avery was now questioning their own memories. Had they missed something? Was there a moment when they had brushed aside a strange look, a too long stare, or an odd comment? It was as though the arrest had cracked open a Pandora's box of secrets, and no one knew where it would end. Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Avery's story than anyone could have imagined. His history of harassment and stalking complaints was troubling enough, but now, with Jessica's case linked to him, it felt like everything they thought they knew about him was a lie. The seemingly perfect neighbor had been hiding a side of himself that no one had seen coming. And then there was the chilling thought that kept circling in Reynolds' mind. What if Avery wasn't the only one? What if there were more victims, more women who had been stalked or worse, by someone who had carefully and deliberately concealed his true nature for years? The pieces were coming together, but they were incomplete. There were too many gaps in the story, too many questions still unanswered. The community was left in a state of shock, disbelief spreading like wildfire. How long had Avery been hiding in plain sight? How had he managed to live this double life, fooling everyone around him? And the most unsettling question of all, how many more women had he targeted in the years leading up to Jessica's disappearance? Had he been planning this crime for months? Or had it been a crime of opportunity? The arrest of James Avery had just begun to uncover the layers of a much darker story, one that had been buried beneath years of silence. And as the investigation unfolded, it was clear that the community was only beginning to understand the terrifying truth. The arrest was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey toward justice, but the questions remained. Was Avery the only one responsible? And if not, who else had been complicit in the terrible secrets he had kept hidden all these years? The arrest had shaken the community to its core, but it was only the tip of the iceberg. What other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of James Avery's quiet life? And what else would come to light as the investigation unfolded? The truth was just beginning to unravel. And it was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. How shocked were you when Avery was arrested? Did you ever suspect someone like him could be hiding such a dark secret? I want to know what you think about his arrest. Was it expected, or did it surprise you? Share your thoughts with me down below. As the investigation into Jessica Carter's disappearance deepened, an unsettling truth began to take shape. A truth that no one, not even Detective Claire Reynolds, had seen coming. What had initially appeared to be an isolated case, a tragic but singular event, was now emerging as the tip of a far darker iceberg. Avery's arrest didn't just solve Jessica's case, it connected him to a much larger, more sinister story that stretched back years. The breakthrough came when investigators revisited Avery's history. The more they looked, the more disturbing patterns began to emerge. There were whispers from the past, other women, other disappearances, all with eerie similarities to Jessica's case. One case in particular stood out, a disappearance from 5 years before Jessica's. A woman named Susan Mills had vanished in a way so similar to Jessica's that it was hard to ignore the parallels. Both women were in their late 20s living alone, and both had been described as friendly and hardworking. Both had been seen at a store shortly before their disappearances, and both had left behind no trace, no signs of struggle, no indication of where they had gone. Their cars had been found abandoned, just like Jessica's, locked with their keys inside, their groceries untouched. At the time, Susan Mills's disappearance had been written off as another tragic case of a missing person, but now, with Avery in custody, it was becoming clear that this might have been no coincidence. The discovery of the link between Jessica's case and Susan Mills's disappearance sent shockwaves through the investigation. Avery, who had been living a life under the radar for so long, now appeared to have a pattern, one that had been ignored or worse, missed by those who had come before. The question was no longer about what had happened to Jessica. It was about how many others had been affected by Avery's predatory behavior. Detective Reynolds dug deeper, reviewing old police files, interviewing witnesses, and connecting the dots between these two cases. The more she uncovered, the more she began to realize that Jessica Carter's case was far from unique. Avery's behavior was part of a larger hidden history of stalking and harassment, one that had been ignored or dismissed for years. But the most chilling discovery came when Reynolds spoke with a friend of Jessica's. Jessica had expressed concerns about someone following her in the days leading up to her disappearance. She had mentioned feeling like she was being watched and even considered changing her routine to avoid going out alone. In retrospect, it was clear that Jessica had been trying to protect herself from a predator, but she hadn't known who that predator was. Interviews with other women in the area revealed similar stories. Stories of strange encounters with Avery, women who felt uncomfortable around him, but never reported their concerns. In hindsight, they realized that Avery had been more than just a friendly mechanic. He had been a dangerous predator, stalking his victims in plain sight. The terrifying realization began to set in. Jessica had been part of Avery's larger predatory behavior, a pattern that had been ignored until now. As Reynolds and her team connected the dots, the full extent of Avery's dark history began to emerge. It became clear that Jessica's case wasn't a random disappearance. It was a calculated act, part of Avery's long-standing predatory behavior. Jessica had been watched, followed, and ultimately targeted by Avery, who had been hiding in plain sight for years. What's worse is that the pattern didn't stop with Jessica. Avery's previous victims, women who had reported strange encounters with him but never thought to connect the dots, now became part of a much larger investigation. Avery had been stalking women for years, manipulating his way into their lives, and then disappearing them without a trace. The police now realized that they were dealing with a man who had not just targeted one woman, but many. The investigation began to shift from one cold case to a full-blown serial investigation. Avery's arrest had opened a door to a much darker history, one that had been hidden from view for far too long. The more Reynolds uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. The investigation was no longer just about Jessica Carter. It was about stopping a man who had been getting away with these crimes for years. How many victims were there? How many women had Avery stalked, manipulated, and harmed before they were finally discovered? The chilling realization set in that Jessica might have been just one of many victims, all tied to Avery's long, dark history. As Reynolds delved deeper into Avery's past, more disturbing details emerged. There were more women, more disappearances that had been left unresolved, more cases that had been written off as random incidents. Avery had lived among them all, blending into the community, hiding in plain sight, while continuing his reign of terror. With each new lead, the investigation grew larger, but the questions became even more pressing. How many other women had Avery harmed, and how many would never be found? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but there were still so many gaps in the story. Could Avery's secret life have gone unnoticed for so long? Had the community, the people who had trusted him for years, missed the signs of his dark side? As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Jessica's murder was not the isolated incident it once appeared to be. It was part of a much larger and more terrifying story. The search for justice was only just beginning, and with each new discovery, the stakes grew higher. But as the investigation continued to unfold, one question remained at the forefront of everyone's mind. How many victims had Avery left behind, and who would be next? The story was far from over, and the darkest parts of this case had yet to be revealed. As the investigation into Avery deepened, new questions arose, each more disturbing than the last. How long had Avery been hiding in plain sight? How many more women had he targeted before Jessica? And what other secrets lay buried beneath his quiet, unassuming life? The search for answers continued, but with every new revelation, the mystery only grew darker. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the full truth was still out of reach. And as the investigation moved forward, the haunting question lingered. How many victims had Avery left behind, and what would the final truth reveal? The moment had finally arrived. The legal battle for justice, the long-awaited trial of James Avery began. And with it, the veil of secrecy that had shrouded his dark actions for decades was slowly being pulled away. It was a case that had captivated not just the local community in Tempe, but people across the nation. The disappearance of Jessica Carter, the chilling discovery of her murder, and the long search for the truth had all led to this pivotal moment. Avery sat silently in the courtroom, flanked by his defense team. To the outside world, he was still the unassuming mechanic who had lived quietly for years. But in the courtroom, everything was about to change. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Jessica's family sat in the front row, their eyes fixed on the defendant, their hearts heavy with the weight of what had been stolen from them. The prosecution, led by the determined and steadfast district attorney, Claire Reynolds, was prepared to present their strongest case. forensic evidence, witness accounts, and the undeniable DNA match that had linked Avery to Jessica's murder all painted a clear and damning picture. But the defense was not going to let this case unfold without a fight. Avery's lawyer, Thomas Delaney, was a seasoned trial attorney, and he wasted no time questioning the validity of the evidence that seemed so clear-cut. As the courtroom buzzed with anticipation, both sides took their positions. The prosecution's first move was to present the DNA evidence, the hair found in Jessica's car, the blood-like stains, and the incriminating match to Avery's DNA. Forensics had played a pivotal role in solving this case, and the prosecution had no doubt that it was their strongest weapon. But the defense, ever prepared, was ready to cast doubt. Thomas Delaney stood tall, his calm demeanor hiding the ferocity beneath. He approached the jury, raising his voice to gain their full attention. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, yes, we have DNA evidence. But DNA alone is not enough to convict a man of murder. We have no eyewitnesses who can definitively place Mr. Avery at the scene. No one saw him attack Jessica. No murder weapon has been recovered. There's no direct evidence linking him to her death beyond this genetic material, which I might add is circumstantial at best. Delaney's words sent ripples through the room. His argument wasn't without merit. In the world of criminal law, DNA alone could not always seal the deal. Without clear witness testimony, without a confession, and without a murder weapon, the defense aimed to poke holes in the prosecution's case. The heart of the debate revolved around the DNA evidence, the key to unraveling the mystery of Jessica's murder. The prosecution stood firm. "This isn't just a random match," said Reynolds, addressing the jury. "This is not a coincidence. We have not just one but several pieces of forensic evidence, DNA, witness accounts, and the physical presence of Avery's truck near the scene of Jessica's car. The DNA found on Jessica's property matches Avery's, and the physical evidence, his truck, his presence near the scene, is enough to connect him to this horrific crime." Reynolds continued, presenting the DNA results in vivid detail. The forensic team had matched the DNA extracted from the hair found in Jessica's car with Avery's genetic profile with 99.9% certainty. The same hair also linked Avery to the scene of the crime, the vehicle, the area, and the timeline. The prosecution leaned into this overwhelming evidence, but Avery's defense team was relentless. They raised serious concerns about the collection and handling of the evidence. "How do we know this DNA wasn't contaminated during the investigation? How do we know it wasn't planted?" Delaney asked, his voice steady but insistent. "The prosecution's case rests solely on this unproven, untested DNA evidence. Evidence that doesn't show us a murder weapon, doesn't show us the actual crime, and doesn't show us who was behind Jessica Carter's death." His words struck a chord. The jury, as impartial as they tried to remain, couldn't ignore the doubts raised. As the trial raged on, the suspense grew. Could the defense's arguments, questioning the validity of the DNA, highlighting the lack of direct evidence, be enough to sway the jury? Or would the forensic evidence, the witness accounts, and the undeniable match to Avery's DNA be enough to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? Each day as the trial unfolded, both sides presented their case. The prosecution's evidence seemed airtight. DNA, witness testimony, and the discovery of Avery's truck near Jessica's abandoned car. The defense, on the other hand, threw up barriers at every turn, attacking the DNA evidence, the lack of physical proof, and questioning the very integrity of the investigation. But there was one thing the jury could not escape: the chilling fact that Avery had been living under the radar for so long, hiding in plain sight, and the only thing standing between him and justice was the shaky hope that the evidence could hold up. The defense's arguments about the DNA's credibility, while convincing on the surface, could not silence the weight of all the other pieces of the puzzle. As the days passed, the jury found themselves grappling with the complexity of the case, the evidence, the contradictions, and the long, drawn-out battle for justice. With each new development, the tension mounted. The jury was left to decide: was the evidence against Avery strong enough to convict him? Was the prosecution's case foolproof, or had the defense's doubts raised enough uncertainty to threaten the case? As the trial entered its final days, One thing became crystal clear. The outcome of this trial would not only decide Avery's fate, but would also shape the future of justice in the community. The entire town of Tempe, along with Jessica's family, watched as the final pieces of this gripping puzzle fell into place. The question now was not whether justice would be served, but how much longer could the community wait for closure? As the closing arguments loomed, the question on everyone's mind remained. Would the jury be swayed by the defense's attempts to undermine the DNA evidence, or would they stand by the prosecution's relentless pursuit of justice for Jessica Carter? The clock was ticking, and the fate of James Avery rested in the hands of 12 jurors. Would justice finally prevail, or would this case be cast back into the darkness of uncertainty? The trial was nearing its end, but the most crucial moment was yet to come. Do you think the defense has a chance in this case? How does the debate around DNA evidence make you feel about the justice system? What's your opinion on the role of DNA in solving cold cases? Drop your thoughts below. I read and respond to every single comment. As the trial of James Avery unfolded in front of a packed courtroom, Jessica's family, her mother, father, and brother sat in silence, watching the scene play out. For them, it wasn't just another trial. It was the culmination of years of pain, uncertainty, and unspeakable grief. Linda, Jessica's mother, had waited 20 years for this moment, a moment that brought both hope and agony, an opportunity to finally see justice served, but also a harsh confrontation with the painful reality of what had happened to her daughter. The long nights of waiting for Jessica to walk through the door, the empty calls to her voicemail, and the unbearable silence that hung in their home had left deep scars. The case had become not just about finding the truth, but about healing, if such a thing was even possible after all these years. The weight of their grief had been building since 2000, and now with every passing day of the trial, it was impossible to ignore. Each new revelation, each detail about Jessica's final moments, dug deeper into the heart of the family. Jessica's brother David sat beside his mother, staring blankly at the courtroom floor. His hands were clasped tightly together, the nails of his fingers digging into his palms. He couldn't bring himself to look at Avery. He had thought of nothing but this moment for 2 decades, but now that it was finally here, he wasn't sure he was ready for it. Linda couldn't stop the tears from flowing. She had kept it together for so long, fighting through the loneliness, the despair, the sense of being abandoned by time itself. But now, hearing the details of her daughter's death, hearing the evidence that tied James Avery to the crime, she felt the weight of it all crashing down on her. Every detail she'd longed to know, every question that had gnawed at her for years, now had an answer. But it was not the answer she had hoped for. She had never imagined this would be how it would end. It wasn't just the fact that her daughter had been taken so violently, but the knowledge that someone they all knew, a man who had lived in their community, trusted by so many, was responsible. And it was the truth, the undeniable, brutal truth, that Jessica would never walk through the door again. The trial progressed, but it seemed to drag on for the Turner family. They had waited for so long for justice to begin, and now that it had arrived, the reality of their struggle was becoming all too real. The pain, the guilt, the disbelief, it was all surfacing in the most raw and overwhelming way. Linda's mind often drifted back to the last time she had seen Jessica, the last time she had heard her voice. She had been so sure her daughter would come home, but now the harsh truth was settling in. Her daughter was never coming back. The man who had taken her from them, who had violated the sanctity of their family, was sitting just a few feet away, facing the consequences of his actions. But was this really justice? David, too, struggled with the trial's emotional toll. He had always been the strong one, the one who kept the family together during those dark years. He had kept the hope alive when it seemed impossible, speaking at vigils, handing out flyers, always searching for answers. But now, with the truth laid bare before him, he could feel the weight of everything they had gone through, and it was almost too much to bear. He remembered the nights when he would lie awake, thinking of Jessica. He remembered how his mother used to keep Jessica's room exactly the same, as if waiting for her to return. She never could bring herself to change anything. But now, with Avery's arrest, the floodgates had opened. The family had to confront all the memories, all the pain, in ways they hadn't imagined. The trial was nearing its end, and the Turner family could feel the heaviness in the air. It wasn't just about Avery's conviction anymore. It was about the emotional toll it was taking on them. The courtroom was filled with tension as the final arguments were made, but the emotional impact on Jessica's family was far more complicated than anything the jury would consider. Would the verdict bring them the closure they had longed for, or would it open up even more painful wounds they weren't ready to face? Linda, sitting in the courtroom, could feel her heart pounding. The years of pain, the years of wondering, of hoping against hope, had brought them to this moment. She had hoped that somehow this day would provide a sense of peace. But now that the truth was finally here, it felt like the pain was only deeper. David, too, was overwhelmed. He thought of the day his sister had vanished, the phone calls, the unanswered questions, the way their lives had been ripped apart. But in that moment, with Avery sitting in the defendant's chair, he realized something he hadn't considered before. This wasn't just about Jessica. It was about their family, about everything they had lost. How much could they endure before they could finally say goodbye? The community, too, was on edge. People who had known Avery for years were struggling to reconcile the image of the kind, helpful mechanic with the man on trial for murder. The arrest and subsequent revelations had sent shockwaves through the town, leaving everyone questioning what they thought they knew about their neighbors, their friends, their lives. Was Avery really the man they thought he was? Could this all really be happening? The final moments of the trial were approaching. The jury was deliberating, the fate of James Avery hanging in the balance. But for the Turner family, the verdict wasn't just about finding out if justice would be served. It was about finding the strength to face what had happened and what it meant for their future. And so the question loomed, would the verdict bring closure, or would it mark the beginning of yet another chapter in their long, painful journey? The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the Turner family waited for the final verdict. But what would that verdict mean? Would it bring the peace they had desperately longed for? Or would it unravel everything they had tried so hard to hold together? The clock was ticking, and the truth was finally within reach. The courtroom was thick with tension. Every eye was fixed on the jury, who had just returned from their deliberation room. The Turners sat motionless, their bodies stiff with anticipation. It had been a long road, 20 years filled with uncertainty, heartache, and the agonizing weight of not knowing. Finally, the moment had arrived. The moment that would either confirm their worst fears or bring a long-awaited sense of justice. The judge's voice cut through the stillness. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood, holding the paper in their hands. Paper that held the weight of a family's pain, a community's disbelief, and years of unspeakable grief. Yes, Your Honor, we find the defendant, James Avery, guilty of the murder of Jessica Carter. The words landed like a thunderclap. The Turner family, who had spent the last 2 decades in a state of limbo, now felt the weight of those words fall upon them. Linda Turner, Jessica's mother, buried her face in her hands. Tears that had been held back for so long finally flowed freely. It wasn't relief, not completely. It was a crushing mixture of sorrow and vindication. The acknowledgement that her daughter's life had been stolen, but justice had, at last, been served. David, Jessica's brother, sat in stunned silence. He had believed for so long that they would never get this moment. The weight of the years, the absence of Jessica, had made it seem impossible that this day would ever come. But now it had. Avery was guilty. The man who had taken their sister, their daughter, their loved one, was finally going to pay for his crime. The courtroom was filled with murmurs, but for the Turner family, the world was quiet. The reality of what had just happened, of the years of searching, of grieving, of fighting for this moment, was almost too much to process. The long silence between the verdict and the moment the gavel slammed down felt endless. But finally the judge's voice cut through again, signaling the end of the trial. James Avery's fate was sealed. The moment of justice didn't just impact the Turner family, it reverberated throughout the entire country. Jessica's case, which had once been buried under the weight of time and unsolved mysteries, now stood as a beacon for a larger conversation that had been long overdue. This case became a catalyst, sparking a national discussion on issues that many had long ignored. The conversation surrounding stalking, emotional abuse, and the insidious nature of predatory behavior reached new heights. For too long, society had failed to recognize the red flags, the warning signs that people like Avery hid so well in plain sight. With the conviction, the world started to take notice. Emotional abuse, stalking, and the victims of such crimes were no longer invisible. People began to understand how these hidden dangers could fester for years, just below the surface, until something tragically snapped. Jessica's story, her life, her disappearance, her death, had forced the world to open its eyes. And in the legal world, the impact was just as profound. The case exposed flaws in how missing persons cases were handled, especially those that seemed to involve no obvious evidence of foul play. In Jessica's case, it was the silence, the lack of evidence, that had made it so difficult for investigators to move forward in the beginning. It was only through new advancements in forensic technology that they had finally managed to piece together the clues, bringing Avery to justice. The case also sparked significant debates in the legal community. How should the justice system handle forensic evidence in cases that take years to unfold? How could law enforcement better track and identify predatory behaviors before they escalated to murder? The conversation extended beyond just legal procedures. It began to touch on personal safety, the importance of recognizing signs of abusive behavior, and how communities could better protect each other. Jessica's case had opened the door for others to speak up, to share their own stories of being stalked, manipulated, or abused. It had given them a voice that had been silenced for too long. As the case made headlines across the country, more people reached out to the Turner family, thanking them for their strength, for their persistence. Stories flooded in from survivors, those who had experienced stalking or had gone through their own battles for justice. The Turners, who had endured so much, became symbols of hope for many. But in the midst of it all, the family was left to process the bittersweet reality of their loss. Justice had been served, but Jessica was gone. No verdict, no conviction, no media coverage could bring her back. Yet in the small but meaningful way that only justice could, there was now a chance for healing. With the verdict delivered, the case was officially closed, or so it seemed. But was this really the end of the story? Or had it only just begun? For the Turner family, there was still so much left unanswered. They had the justice they had fought for, but did they have closure? What other truths might be lurking beneath the surface of Jessica's life? What other dark secrets might have been hidden for all those years? As James Avery was led away in handcuffs, a new question began to surface. Could there be more victims? Had Avery's predatory behavior stretched beyond Jessica and reached others? For the family, for the community, and for those who had followed the case, there was a creeping sense that while justice had been served, the shadows of the past might still be casting a long, unsettling presence. Could the truth ever really be known? Would Jessica's death, though justice had been delivered, still hold secrets that remain locked away? Only time would tell. But one thing was for certain. No matter how many years it took, no matter how many twists and turns the case had taken, the truth had finally emerged. James Avery's dark secrets had been brought into the light, and the world would never look at him the same way again. The Turner family could finally breathe, knowing that, at last, their daughter's story had been told. But what would happen next? Would there be more shocking revelations to come, or was this the final chapter? With every passing day, the answer remained just out of reach. Thank you again, my incredible subscribers, for being part of this journey. Your support keeps this channel thriving, and together we're shedding light on these haunting cold cases. If you found Jessica's case as gripping as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking stories like this one. Share this with someone who loves uncovering mysteries and let's continue our mission of bringing justice to those who've waited far too long. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know whenever I drop a new video. And if you want to dive deeper into more solved cold cases, check out our previous videos right here on the channel. You won't want to miss what we have in store next.